My name is Nelson Noss, and I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of the Ghost Guild. I've lived in North Carolina for over 30 years, but I'm originally from Montreal, Canada. Most are actually surprised when I tell them that French is my first language. In my day job, I work in healthcare IT, and more specifically, data and analytics for a large academic medical center in Chapel Hill.
And I'm Kelly McConkey, co-founder of the Ghost Guild, a licensed professional counselor and expressive arts therapist with a leading public research university located in Raleigh. I'm a social advocate, an activist, and a lover of the arts.
We're excited to be welcoming you to Raleigh, North Carolina, and having you join us here virtually at Mordecai Historic Park.
Back in January of 2017, while sitting in a booth at Bad Daddy's Burger Bar in Raleigh, the Ghost Guild was founded. Since then, we've investigated over 30 different locations all around North America.
The Ghost Guild is a registered nonprofit organization based in North Carolina. We're always seeking locations of historical significance to dive into their history and to bring attention to them as well as their preservation efforts.
That is why we were thrilled when back in June of 2017, we were awarded the contract with Mordecai Historic Park. In exchange for investigating the park several times per year, we get to present our findings at the annual Haunted Mordecai Festival, which takes place the last Saturday of the month of October.
It goes without saying that things are a little different this year. To start, the extended closure of the park meant that we didn't get an opportunity to investigate here this year. And that means that we don't have any new data to share with you. Secondly, our regular presentation takes place in the visitor center, which can get pretty crammed, and we aren't about to place anyone at unnecessary risk. So this year, we've adapted and decided on an alternative to canceling the festival, and here we are tonight. We see this year's virtual program as turning negatives into a positive. And we're excited to be able to bring the festival to a much larger audience, combining history, folklore, personal experiences, data from prior investigations, and the first live stream investigation of the park.
As we proceed through the evening, you will get to meet some of our diverse team members, all of which who have at least one thing in common: a love for history, science, and the unexplained. Just like us, all of our members are volunteers. All hold professional daytime jobs, and each one brings about a specific skill set.
Many of you are likely wondering what to expect tonight, and that's not an easy answer, because we don't know. If you're used to watching the paranormal shows on TV, we can definitely share with you that tonight won't be like that. What you see on those shows is condensed and edited from many, many hours of footage.
There have been plenty of nights when we've left this park empty-handed, and others where we've had experiences we still can't explain. So, who knows what kind of night this is going to be? But for centuries, the ethereal glow of a full moon has inspired wild and unusual tales, folklore, and supernatural legends all around the world. Maybe she'll help us out tonight.
So we believe you should expect to learn some history and legends, and see and hear previously captured data, and witness how we go about performing some of our investigations.
The success of tonight's stream is heavily dependent on technology, especially a dependable internet connection. If all goes according to plan, the evening will consist of 6 back-to-back streams, with a short intermission in between each. Each stream will focus on a specific area of the park, including the Mordecai House, President Andrew Johnson's birthplace, and St. Mark's Chapel. In our final stream, we will recap the night's events and select our winners for the several prizes we have up for grabs.
Now that we've set the stage for tonight's Haunted Mordecai Festival, we hope you choose to stick around. And now, without further ado, let's introduce you to the park.
We're very fortunate to have Mordecai Historic Park as a place to visit today, but not very many people know of how the park came to be. Well, that story starts in the early 1900s with a lady by the name of Patty Mordecai. Miss Patty, as she was often called, had managed the Mordecai property and taken care of the house by selling off parts of the property and reinvesting in local businesses and neighborhoods. Not having any children of her own, she decided to leave the property to her nephew, Burke Little. Now, Burke had lived in the house his entire life, and when his aunt agreed to leave him the property, she made him promise to never sell the house. Well, 1964 came around and Burke was in failing health. His family helped him move to a local nursing home and started conversations about what to do with the house, since at that time it was in pretty rough shape. By 1965, the Mordecai family had reached out to the Historic Sites Commission to begin talks about purchasing the Mordecai house and restoring it. Although it took several years and the efforts of preservationists and several prominent citizens, eventually in 1968, the city of Raleigh purchased the Mordecai house and the surrounding square. With this new addition to the city, talks quickly turned to what to do with several other historic buildings associated with Raleigh. The decision was made to turn Mordecai Square into Mordecai Historic Park, and to add the Andrew Johnson House, the Badger Iredell Law Office, the Post Office, the Allen Kitchen, and finally the St. Mark's Chapel to the property. In 1972, many of the citizens who were instrumental in saving the house formed the Mordecai Square Historical Society, later known as Capital Area Preservation, to manage and help preserve the property. The group also acquired collection pieces from the Mordecai family. And over the next several decades, the Mordecai house was filled with over 4,000 artifacts, many of which had once belonged to the Mordecais themselves. In 2005, the City of Raleigh's Parks and Recreation Department took over management of Mordecai Historic Park. Today, the park is one of 13 locations managed by the Historic Resources Museum program, which is a section within Raleigh's Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Department. The most recent change to the park has been the addition of a visitor center, located across the street from the Mordecai house in the historic Bouchal Danielson House. It was the home of Mr. Danielson, who was a friend of the park for many years until his passing in 2011. Today, any tour of the property begins with visitors entering the Bouchal Danielson house and observing the permanent Mordecai exhibit before crossing the street. While the Mordecai Park has certainly changed in many ways over the years since the last Mordecai family member lived here, much effort and love has been put into the park to preserve the site for generations to come.
During one of our investigations, I was in the Andrew Johnson's birthplace when I heard what I can best describe as gravel being displaced. Upon making my way back to the house, I heard Jenny, another team member, speak about what she had just heard. She had been in the smokehouse doing an EVP session by herself when she heard heavy footsteps on the gravel coming from outside the door. Assuming it was a team member, she opened the door and looked around. There's nobody there.
It was then time for everyone to rotate to their next assigned location in the park, and my turn to spend time in the smokehouse. Now, after finding out what Nick and Jenny had heard, I purposely stood in this doorway with the door open, interested to see if I also could hear these footsteps. Well, after a few minutes, I did. The sound was coming from here, and although I could clearly hear what sounded like someone walking, I couldn't see anyone as I was making my way towards the sound. Now, although the cadence of the footsteps was what I would expect from a human adult, I did want to make sure that it wasn't a critter that was somehow responsible. So I pulled out our thermal camera to see if I could pick up some thermal heat signature of something that wasn't clearly visible. But I saw no such signature.
We still don't know what we heard that night, but one thing is for sure. We'll be paying close attention to this area of the park in our future investigations in hopes of solving this mystery.
Every time I've investigated the smokehouse on the Mordecai property, I have felt the presence of a man in the far back corner. The first couple of times I investigated, I could feel his fear, his uncertainty about who we were and why we were there. The more I have spent time with him in there, speaking to him, the more that fear has turned to curiosity. The last time our team investigated and I was alone in the smokehouse, I said my usual friendly hello, and I placed some equipment in that corner. I then moved to the other side of the space to give him some room. I spoke to him and played him music, and not only could I feel him there with me, but something started to trigger my equipment. And when I said my goodbyes and I went home that night, I had what I think was a dream. In the dream, I was asleep in my bed and I woke to see the man from the smokehouse. He was standing just outside of my bedroom closet. Now, he was not there to frighten me and he did not speak. He just simply watched as if he was curious himself as to how he came to be there. In the dream, I offered words of kindness and care, but I also explained that he could not stay, that I was glad he had visited, but that I hoped he might take this opportunity to move on. He nodded, and I immediately then woke up to the darkness of my room. I've often wondered, was it a dream? I'm looking forward to spending more time in that smokehouse and seeing if he's still there, or if perhaps he took my advice and he's moved on to a better place.
As mentioned earlier, every tour of Mordecai Historic Park starts here at the Visitor Center. But all too often, people walk in and out of this house without knowing that it too has some interesting history. So to end our first segment of the night, and before going into our first intermission, let's dive into that history. Now, when we return from intermission, we will go ahead and cross the street and take you to the cornerstone of the park, the Mordecai House.
The Mordecai Visitor Center may be outside the historic square, but the building has a long history of its own. Known as the Bouchal-Danielson House, it was built between 1922 and 1923 by Raleigh businessman Joseph Dozier Bouchal and his wife, Mattie Heck Bouchal. The couple had married in 1889 and lived for some time on New Bern Avenue in a Queen Anne-style home that would later be moved to face Blunt Street. In 1916, with new apartments built next to their home, the Bouchals decided to move into the grand home of Mattie's mother down North Blunt Street. The couple lived here with her family until they sold the property to Alexander Andrews in 1921 and went in search of their own home. The Heck Andrews house still stands today on the block catty corner to the Governor's Mansion, with its recognizable Second Empire style. The Bouchals moved further north to their new home, purchasing some of the original Mordecai property from William Person Little in 1922, just across the street from the original Mordecai house. The home was built in a neoclassical style with large Corinthian columns and beveled glass. It faced the busy Wake Forest Road, which would soon become Route 1 in 1926, an even busier path for travelers. By 1933, the city of Raleigh acquired the property and deeded it to Ruth Barnes through the North Carolina Bank and Trust Company. Ruth sold the property to her foster son and made a deal that would allow her and her husband Furman to live in the house for the rest of their lives. The Barnes made the most out of living close to such a busy traveling road and opened up the Tour Inn. This was one of the many bed and breakfast style establishments along Route 1, a few of which you can still see today down the street. At various points in its early years, the home was open for guests to stay for longer periods of time, with rent available by week or month in the summer months. In the late 1950s and 60s, the Barnes opened up the Tour Inn to permanent residents with private or adjoining bathrooms. After over 40 years of living in the house, Ruth and her husband passed away, and her foster son sold the house to Arthur Danielson. Mr. Danielson turned the first level into an antique shop, and he lived on the second level. The city of Raleigh purchased the Bouchal-Danielson house in 2012. While renovating and preserving the original house, the city added on a classroom and meeting space, and the visitor center opened to the public in 2014. The visitor center has given the park the opportunity to expand its programming. If you'd like to take a look around the historic property, stop by for a visit.